Meanwhile, Kamala's VP, Tim Walz, is being accused of lying about his rank, which is called stolen valor. But in Walz's defense in Minneapolis, stealing is legal. But misrepresenting your past for political gain? I don't see that as a problem, said one woman. Yeah, well, Walz's expression throughout the entire time did not convey steadiness. No. Like almost like unsteady weirdness.
Like he could have been one of the Three Stooges, just like.
Yeah. I go back to Walz was shocked.
If that Tim Walz, if that guy got into power.
And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Like if Kamala died and Tim Walz, Tampon Tim, was our president.
I used to think the Democrats were crazy for saying that men have periods, but then I met Tim Walz.
You know how crazy this country would be?
These guys come up with the weirdest damn ideas that you will ever imagine. You know it's true.
That weirdo who puts tampons in the boys' room. What about our children?
If clueless leadership had a face, it'd be Tim Walz blinking into the chaos like he's surprised it didn't RSVP first. But hold on to something, because Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld just pulled up with flamethrowers made of sarcasm and absolutely zero chill. Imagine a governor getting politically incinerated while still clinging to his ban on plastic straws. Yeah, it's that level of irony. Grab your popcorn, because this isn't just a takedown, it's a full-blown demolition, derby of disastrous decisions, and the verbal body slams. They come fast, sharp, and unforgiving.
Bring in her, and they bring in this other guy who's radical from Minnesota. That's the vice president, who he believes a lot of wild things. One of them is transgender surgery for people who are under 13. Another one is abortion up until 9 months.
Ooh,
yeah. He changed the Minnesota state flag to make it look like a Somali flag. That stuff scares the fuck out of people.
Ah, yes. Tim Walz, the man running Minnesota like it's a small-town high school musical. And somehow he's playing both the principal and the janitor. A walking shrug in khakis. So proudly mediocre. He makes beige look like a fashion statement. If leadership had a color, Walz would be that mysterious gray stain on the carpet too stubborn to scrub out. Too awkward to acknowledge. And somehow always right in the middle of the room.
We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote.
Wait, so Trump is making it more difficult for women to vote? How so? Math problems? But it's further proof that the most dangerous thing for a leftist is a follow-up question, which is why you never hear any. But I guess questioning elections is okay now. But the best moment came when Walz forgot who he is.
Joe Rogan didn't even need DMT to start tripping over Walz's decision-making because honestly, the guy's entire policy playbook feels like it was brainstormed on the back of a Taco Bell napkin during a low blood sugar crash. Every time Walz steps up to speak, you can practically hear the collective groan of Minnesotans louder, somehow, than the chaos that would erupt if Taylor Swift canceled a concert mid-SOUNDCHECK.
A complete pathological liar.
Let's be honest. There are outsiders coming into communities, stealing and moving jobs away, and making life harder for people living there. And they have names: Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
Complete liar. Lied about being in Tiananmen Square. Lied about being a head coach of a football team.
Because this started, and I love this story, as a young prosecutor. Kamala Harris talked about going in that courtroom for the first time.
Pathological liars. People that are habitual liars. They just lie all the time about everything. Yeah. Oh, you didn't deploy for war. You didn't. Why are you saying you deployed at war? The weapons you used in war? No. You were in war.
I plan on waking up on November 6th with Madam President.
I want to be clear. You won't be waking up together.
No, you weren't a head coach. You were the water boy. What the f*** are you talking about?
I thought some of that was weird.
He's just a liar.
Greg Gutfeld took one look at Walz's idea of leadership and called it performance art for the terminally confused, and, honestly, that was generous. Tim Walz runs the state like it's a part-time hobby he squeezes in between fantasy football drafts. He governs with the urgency of a guy who thinks executive order is just a fancy sandwich on the Panera menu. Hold the accountability. Extra mayo.
Tim Walz vomits more nonsense.
I called Donald Trump a wannabe dictator. It's because he is. But when it's adult like Donald Trump, you bully the shit out of him back. This is a weak, cruel man that takes it out and punches down on people.
Wow. Oh. Jamie.
What a
Painful,
douchebag,
huh?
Greg. That was absolutely painful. He was the keynote speaker at this conference. Can you imagine having to watch more of that?
Yeah.
Let's not forget Tim Walz's greatest gift, saying absolutely nothing with the maximum number of words. The man speaks like a malfunctioning TED Talk. Lots of pacing, wild hand gestures, and buzzwords like equity and systemic tossed out like glitter bombs at a kindergartner's birthday party. It's not a speech, it's a progressive word salad with no dressing, just dry, wilted kale, and the sour aftertaste of tax hikes. Joe Rogan actually tried to make sense of Walz's pandemic policies and came out the other side needing a shaman, a sensory deprivation tank, and a support group. His exact words: "Wait, so bars are closed, but strip clubs can stay open if they also sell Hot Pockets." That's peak Walz logic. He approached COVID policy like someone spinning a wheel labeled lockdown, curfew, and just a giant shrug emoji, and when he declared emergency powers, he did it with the giddy energy of a teenager discovering cheat codes in a video game. Except this wasn't Grand Theft Auto. This was Minnesota, and instead of fast cars and unlimited ammo, we got mask mandates that flipped more times than his approval rating.
Holy shit. He said what?
What is a woman is the question.
I'm not sure I understand the question here. What do you want me to say?
I want you to say that a woman like me is an adult human female, that men can't become women. You guys are the party of violence, and you're the party erasing women. You don't respect us. You're a bigot. You're a misogynist. You're a sexist. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Greg Gutfeld called him America's hall monitor with a messiah complex, and honestly, that might be the kindest way to put it. Tim Walz doesn't just enter a room, he floats in. Like he's about to deliver us from evil using a PowerPoint presentation and a lavender-scented candle. He governs like he's leading a wellness retreat for emotionally fragile policy interns. Not, an actual state. Every press conference feels like a TED Talk hosted by a substitute geography teacher who just read their first book on mindfulness. He doesn't solve problems, he gently narrates them, with a soft voice and the emotional urgency of someone explaining composting at a co-op. As for crisis management, picture a guy trying to put out a grease fire with a vision: board, wildfires, task force, police reform, task force with matching lanyards and laminated mission statements, inflation, a weekly task force meeting to define inflation through interpretive dance. If a volcano ever erupted in Minnesota, Walz wouldn't sound the alarm, he'd launch a volcanic inclusion and dialogue initiative and hand out complimentary lava-proof fanny packs.
Walz is lost, but mourning it. Now, the truth is that a VP debate is like a colonoscopy. It's important and necessary, but that doesn't mean you want to watch it.
Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Yeah. Even a deer in the headlights is screaming, "Get the out of the way, dude!"
When crime started surging, Tim Walz responded like he was reviewing a disappointing brunch menu. He acknowledged it, furrowed his brow just enough to look like he cared, and then moved on to creating another commission with a trendy logo and a mission statement that says absolutely nothing under his watch. Minnesota nice became Minnesota. Brace yourself, you're more likely to get mugged outside. A Whole Foods then fined parking criminals aren't worried they're networking at this point. Minneapolis is less of a city and more of a group project where everyone refuses to lead but insists on being heard. Joe Rogan almost spit out his elk meat, laughing at Walz soft on crime policies, and that's saying something because Rogan usually saves that kind of reaction for Bigfoot documentaries and vegan cheese. Under Walz, public safety is treated like an experimental art exhibit, abstract, confusing, and definitely not comforting. His strategy: don't police, just process. Carjackers get empathy seminars. Shoplifters is get restorative poetry readings. It's less law enforcement and more group therapy for felons.
Video of Tim Walz doing the exact same thing.
Right.
Exact same thing. And
Yes.
he said, of course, it's a Nazi salute. He said that.
Right.
We spent 3 days debating, having them trying to debate that President Musk gave a Nazi salute. Of course he did. But that is a distraction.
This is how crazy things.
Greg Gutfeld joked that if Tim Walz were a superhero, his power would be making burglars feel seen and validated, and honestly, he's not wrong. In Minnesota, the only people getting faster government responses than repeat offenders are vegan, bicycle activists with a minor in equity studies. Meanwhile, small businesses got steamrolled like a squirrel at a monster truck rally. During the pandemic, Walz rolled out restrictions so convoluted they needed their own glossary. Restaurants had to operate like covert spy rings, open one day, shut the next, and by Friday, they were running soup kitchens for squirrels. Hair salons were locked down tighter than CIA bunkers, while big box stores hummed along just fine because, apparently, if you sell patio furniture and existential dread in bulk, you're essential. Joe Rogan nailed it. Walz's policies weren't based on science, they were based on vibes, virtue, and whatever his consultant's vision board said before brunch. It was as if Walz believed the virus specifically targeted small-batch coffee drinkers and locally sourced sandwich artisans. If you sold crafts or lived within 5 blocks of a co-op, you got hit with restrictions faster than you could say artisan, sourdough, under Walz. If Minnesota had a spirit animal, it'd be a deer caught in headlights, wearing a mask, and holding a community feedback form.
Walz lost, but one of them, Politico says, is like Walz's wide eyes showed his passion and emotional intensity. Can we show that? There is his wide eyes. That humans would widen their eyes to convey that danger is close. What emotion are you getting from that?
Sorry. That was every...
And let's not overlook his slow-motion train wreck of an education agenda. Tim Walz loves to say he's pro-teacher, but under his watch, Minnesota students are graduating knowing less about algebra and more about their identity gardens. Classrooms have morphed into therapy lounges with vending machines. Kids can't read cursive, but they've penned 14 essays on microaggressions and the historical trauma of standardized testing. Greg Gutfeld didn't hold back, he joked. If a kid asked Tim Walz how to divide fractions, Walz would create a racial equity commission. And he's not wrong. Walz treats academic achievement like it's some outdated relic of colonial oppressions, something better buried than improved. Joe Rogan put it even more bluntly. Minnesota's education plan under Walz is basically no child left behind as long as that child doesn't ask for grades, structure, or a coherent curriculum. It's a full-blown carnival of lowered expectations. And when test scores tank, don't worry. Walz will just blame systemic issues and roll out a taxpayer-funded feelings workshop. Under Walz, progressive seems to mean spending more to achieve less. The infrastructure's still crumbling. The roads look like pothole obstacle courses. And taxes are higher than Snoop Dogg on a weekend in Colorado. Yet somehow, Walz walks around like he's the second coming of FDR if FDR wore a Fitbit and hosted guided meditation sessions.
Shit, like you're just trying to debunk something, especially now when there's all this scrutiny being paid attention to what this guy's done. Yeah. What have you, what's the false stuff, Jamie? It's not the flag itself, correct?
I typed in, I was just trying to even get to it. A whole bunch of stories were popping up. I'll just show you this. Like, no, he didn't give him a Somali flag. No, he didn't change it to resemble Somali. False Somali.
But what does it look? Okay, but what does it look like now? Do you care what the flag looks like, first of all? And why do you get to change the flag? How crazy is that the governor gets to change the flag?
But what does it look like now? Really, does anyone even care what the flag looks like? And more importantly, why does the governor get to change it? Since when does Tim Walz get to play graphic designer for the entire state? Joe Rogan nailed it when he called him the human version of a Prius, quiet, self-important, and always in the way. And then Greg Gutfeld took it a step further. If mediocrity had a face, it would be hosting a ribbon-cutting ceremony while crime spikes in the background. And the wild part, Minnesota just keeps clapping like it's the school play. And everyone's too scared to boo because the drama teacher looks like he might cry. Every one of Walz's speeches feels like a fever dream TEDx talk. Everything's a conversation, never a solution. No real decisions, just hashtags, town halls, and public-private partnerships that cost a fortune and deliver nothing. His leadership style, leading from the middle of the road, because picking a direction might offend someone. And then there's his green energy crusade. Sounds noble. Until you realize it means bulldozing farmland for solar panels and banning gas-powered lawnmowers like they're weapons of mass destruction. Walz wants Minnesota to be net zero by 2050. Meanwhile, half the state still can't get a plowed road or a decent Wi-Fi signal.
Walz continues to be criticized for embellishing his rank and service. After it came out over the weekend, he once claimed to be an official bikini inspector. Walz's direct superior in the National Guard says Walz knew his unit was about to deploy to Iraq and went behind the back of his superior officer to resign. When reached for comment, Walz yelled, "Hey, look over there!" and then ran away. Although Walz's actions look bad to veterans, Dems say these revelations could really help him.
Joe Rogan rolled his eyes so hard reading Walz's climate proposal, he nearly pulled a muscle. "Bro," he said, "this guy is banning plastic straws in a state where the air hurts your face 7 months out of the year." Walz acts like he's saving the planet, but in reality, he's just making life more expensive for people who can't afford his eco-fantasy dressed up as policy. Greg Gutfeld didn't miss a beat. He's fighting climate change with Instagram graphics and a taxpayer-funded bird sanctuary. And honestly, you'd think Minnesota was single-handedly responsible for global warming the way Walz carries on. Meanwhile, real working families are stuck choosing between putting food on the table or keeping the lights on. But hey, at least the bike lanes are wider. Tim Walz governs like he's trying to win an NPR raffle, not run a state full of actual people with jobs, mortgages, and a low tolerance for nonsense. His budget priorities read like the Christmas list of a sociology major who's never paid rent and thinks gluten is a hate crime. More money for consultants, less for cops. More for sensitivity training, less for roads. More time listening, and less time actually doing. Well, anything.
He was 100% right with Tim Walz.
Saying on my phone, I don't know, some of you know this on the iPhone, they've got that little stock app. I added Tesla to it to give me a little boost during the day. 225 and dropping.
I mean, that guy was almost the vice president of the United States. I'm sure you've seen that thing where it shows Obama saying, "I need a vice president that's dumber than me."
And
then it's Biden, and Biden saying, "I need a vice president dumber than me." And it's Kamala, and Kamala saying, "I need a vice president dumber than me." And it's Walz.
This is why
men have tampons.
Yeah.
I used to think the Democrats were crazy for saying that men have periods, but then I met Tim Walz.
Joe Rogan once joked that talking to Tim Walz is like arguing with a malfunctioning Alexa. Sure, it sounds smart, responds to all the right buzzwords, and still somehow manages to do absolutely nothing you asked for. You could shout leadership at Walz for hours, and all you'd get in return is a recycled word cloud and a 90-minute listening session, complete with circle time and laminated empathy cards. Greg Gutfeld put it even sharper. Walz's entire brand is Midwestern guilt weaponized into policy. He's a one-man identity crisis, trying to be woke enough for MSNBC, practical enough for the Chamber of Commerce, and boring enough for public access TV, and managing to fail at all three. He bans flavored vaping but lets crime run wild. He performs virtue signals on race while throwing law enforcement under the bus like a teenager caught with a vape pen. He claims he's helping the poor while taxing them into a diet of ramen noodles and propane fumes. And through it all, Walz carries himself like he's Moses descending from Mount Lake Wobegon, clutching a PowerPoint instead of stone tablets, preaching progress while the state quietly crumbles behind him.
Talking about these old white guys who seem to disappoint us on a regular basis in this country.
Dude. You're an old white guy. And you're right, you are a huge disappointment. I guess hating himself is the first thing he's nailed correctly. Because Walz saying old white men suck isn't a political stance, it's his confession. Walz calling people old and white is like Maxine Waters making fun of someone for shopping at Wigs R Us. He wants to execute more DEI policies, and Trump wants to execute murderous gang members.
Joe Rogan couldn't stop laughing when he saw Walz's so-called equity dashboard. A dashboard, bro. As if Excel spreadsheets are going to fix collapsing cities and rising crime rates. People asked for basic safety and functioning streets, not a color-coded map of buzzwords. But that's the Walz method. More committees, less reality. More jargon, fewer jobs. He's like a passive-aggressive HR email, come to life drenched in bureaucratic cologne, and completely unaware. Greg Gutfeld nailed it again. Walz is a human, whiteboard with bad handwriting and even worse ideas. His press conferences should come with a bottle of aspirin and a warning label. May cause dizziness, confusion, and uncontrollable eye rolls. He drops words like resiliency, community-based outreach, and multimodal funding mechanisms and No one knows what the hell he's talking about, and that's the trick. Confuse the public just long enough and maybe they won't notice their car got stolen last night. Tim Walz is that substitute teacher everyone loved at first because he let the class watch movies instead of learning. But then test day hit, everyone bombed, and somehow he got promoted to principal. That's how Minnesota ended. Up here, stuck in a political group project where the guy doing the least keeps getting credit, because his PowerPoint had fancy transitions.
Was get in charge one more time. I mean, they were talking about cracking down on hate speech online. Like, that free speech is not hate speech. That Tim Walz guy was actually saying that.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
Hate speech. Free speech does not include hate speech. What are you, by whose definition? Yours? A guy who thinks tampons should be in the boys' room?
So here's the deal. Tim Walz is the poster child for style over substance politics. He's like a walking liberal arts thesis with executive powers. All big words, vague sentiment, and zero follow-through. Ask him why the streets haven't been plowed, and he'll smile, nod, and launch into a 20-minute monologue about shared values and community healing. He's not leading, he's narrating a documentary no one asked to watch. Joe Rogan nailed it when he said Walz is like an NPC that glitched into government, and honestly, that's being generous. At least NPCs are predictable. Walz is chaotic in the worst way, like a blender with the lid off. You press start, and suddenly there's smoothie policy splattered across your face. And no one's coming to clean it up. Greg Gutfeld summed it up perfectly. Tim Walz is what happens when you give a motivational poster a taxpayer-funded pension. And Minnesota. It's the group therapy session just trying to recover from the damage.